In the era of transparency and accountability, open data initiatives have emerged as vital tools for enhancing public trust and fostering innovation. However, the success of these initiatives hinges on effective stakeholder management. Stakeholders, including government agencies, civil society organizations, private sector actors, and the general public, play critical roles in the design, implementation, and sustainability of open data projects. Before we start today's session, let's take time to reflect on this. Imagine you've been asked to implement an open data initiative in the health sector for the vulnerable communities in your country. What are the 3 things you will do immediately? Let's take another reflection. You're organizing a joint public participation meeting for trade and security ministries. Which people will you invite and for what agenda? So, as we delve into today's topic, here are the 3 things I would like us to explore. Number 1, we are going to have a look at stakeholder management. We'll review stakeholder mapping, and finally, we'll talk about the effective ways of stakeholder management. Let's start with a few definitions. A stakeholder, in very simple terms, is any group or individual who can affect or is affected by your objectives. Whether you achieve them or you don't, this person or this group of individuals will get affected. Groups that bear some form of risk as a result of investing some form of capital, or groups that are in exchange relationships, or people who are in exchange relationships, can also be defined as stakeholders. So why focus on stakeholder management? 2 key things: governments and institutions that manage their stakeholder relationships effectively will survive longer and perform better. Number 2, projects or initiatives that involve stakeholders are more likely to be successful. Now, it's important to note that regardless of the nature of your stakeholders, their engagement with you and your organization or your project or your initiative will mean that they will either have 1 or 3 of the following. They will either have power, and power here is defined as the ability of one person to influence others and have control over others, or they could have influence, which is the power to affect the cause of an action, and others may have authority, which is the power vested in a position. Understanding what each of your stakeholder possesses, whether it is power, influence, or authority, and how to engage with them is key to mutually beneficial relationships. And therefore, it's important to never forget that effective stakeholder management increases the probability of success for your program or for your initiative, and being able to clearly understand the goals of your stakeholders, what their needs are, and what they would want to see is very, very helpful, as it minimizes stakeholder resistance through the development and implementation of your initiative. So what does the stakeholder management process involve? 5 key steps. 1 is identifying your stakeholders, and that's basically listing them down. 2, assessing their attitude and degree of influence, which is mapping. And then 3 is to develop a plan to engage with your stakeholders and address their different issues and needs. Once you have developed the plan, then the next step is to execute it, and finally is to monitor. It's important to continuously monitor so that you're able to identify and pick up evolving attitudes, changing levels of influence, as well as feedback on their satisfaction levels and engagement. How can you map your stakeholders? There are many ways of doing that, but today I will just share a few. Now, one of the ways to map out your stakeholders is depending on the level of influence. And here, I mean, do they have legitimacy? And legitimacy is when one person can use the power of the pen to activate actions of another entity in legal ways or in ways that are binding, okay, by law. And law could also include social norms of values and beliefs. Another way to map is through power. And power, we said, is when one social actor can get another social actor to do something that we would not have otherwise done. And here, most times you find that people who have resources, whether they are financial resources or people resources, are likely to be powerful because they're able to influence budgets, they're able to influence programs, they're able to influence initiatives. And then the last one is urgency, the degree to which a stakeholder claims calls for immediate action. For example, children in a boarding school or university students or employees, if they give a notice to strike and they give a date, then it means that if their demands are not met by a certain date, even community members, we've seen that happen, where they come up and they say, we have these issues, we want to have a meeting with the public officers, and if we don't get to meet them by this time, then we will not participate. So in this case, usually a stakeholder who has urgency is very likely and easy to give demands. Now, that is the first level of mapping your stakeholders. The next level of mapping your stakeholders is delving into the mix between the levels of influence they have. What do I mean? One stakeholder could have two levels of influence. So you could have a stakeholder who has both legitimacy and power, or you could have a stakeholder who has power and urgency. And so the next level gets granular because you get an opportunity to delve further into to what extent of influence do they have. And so I'm going to introduce new terms here. One of the terms is a dangerous stakeholder. This is a stakeholder who possesses both urgency and power. It means they can be coercive and even possibly violent when they are making their demands. A dependent stakeholder, on the other hand, is a stakeholder who possesses legitimacy and urgency. So they don't have power, they depend on others for power. And that's why we call them dependent. A demanding one is one who has urgency and have claims and demands immediate action. A dormant stakeholder is one who has power. A dominant one has power and legitimacy. Okay? A discretionary one, they have legitimacy. So that's all they bring to the table. Now, definitive stakeholders are those that possess both urgency and power. And these ones should really be treated as a top priority and must be engaged at all times. Now, in what ways can we effectively engage with these types of stakeholders and get their buy-in and collaboration now that we know what they're likely to possess? So, for dormant stakeholders, keep them informed at all times. For dominant stakeholders, keep them informed at all times and also provide them with detailed information about certain operations. Discretionary ones, these ones are easy to manage because you will only involve them when it's necessary. So you don't have to constantly be in touch with them, but make sure that they have an overall general picture of what's going on. And the demanding ones, because they're demanding for your attention, you have to give it to them, but you also have to be careful not to invest too much as they can easily derail you from the core business or from your core function. Dependent stakeholders need to be managed because they can quite easily choose to align themselves with other project stakeholders and influence your project. So these ones, they need careful management. Dangerous ones, like I said, these ones you have to engage, you have to often figure out their satisfaction levels and create a relationship with them, right? Definitive ones, make them a priority for the success of your initiative. It's possible to have a group of people that we call non-stakeholders. And when we say non-stakeholders, what we mean is They may neither have legitimacy, power, or agency, but in the event and during the duration of the development and perhaps implementation of your initiative, they had not initially been considered as stakeholders, but they become stakeholders. Now, in what ways can you influence your stakeholders? And I want to share with you 10 influence tactics that you can use. The first one is rational persuasion. This tactic usually involves using logical arguments, factual evidence, and data to convince others to support your initiative. You can also use pressure, and pressure tactics require you to demand, dish out threats, or even give persistent reminders to influence someone's behavior or cause them to make a decision. The third tactic is legitimate tactics. These rely on authority or position the influencer has to be able to gain compliance. Another tactic is what we call coalition building. This involves gathering allies to support you, and this way you're able to strengthen your position and increase your level of influence. Exchange is another form of influence, and this simply means offering something of value in return for what you want. Personal appeal is something that you could use to influence your stakeholders, and this is where you create personal relationships and emotional connections with the people that you're engaging with. You could do this by sharing your experiences. You could do this by appealing to their feelings, whether it is feelings of loyalty or friendship or even shared values. Consultation is another tactic that you can use, which involves involving others in decision making, seeking their input, asking for their opinions, so that they feel that they are part of the process and their opinions matter. Ingratiation. This involves flattery, compliments, or acts of kindness to make somebody become more likable in the eyes of the target. Now, I laugh because there are other words, not very kind words, that have been used to describe this tactic, such as bootlicking, for instance. But the idea is to create a positive impression on the person or on the stakeholder that you want to onboard, so that then they are likely to support you and to give you buy-in for the initiative that you have. Inspirational appeal is a tactic that is used to inspire and motivate others by appealing to their values, emotions, and aspirations. And then finally is emotional appeal. This focuses on eliciting feelings such as empathy, compassion, or even fear in order to influence behavior. Having discussed these things, here's what I'd like to remind you as the key things to remember when engaging with your stakeholders. Number one is solicit input from them. Take time to understand their needs and how your open data initiative or your project could help them. How can you make your lives better? All right. Number two is introduce how open data might be used externally and internally to create business, social, and economic value. And then it's also important to take time to think about your participation and the stakeholders' participation, okay? And think about how do you make sure that the data is going to be complete. Think about how the data you're going to collect is going to identify or fill the gaps that have been previously identified. And think about how that data is going to be used to help generate new resources. And these resources could be financial resources. These resources could be in terms of policies and frameworks. So think about those things. Finally, I would encourage you to watch the video resources provided in this module, as they will provide useful insights into a deeper understanding of effective stakeholder management and the do's and the don'ts. As I sign out, let me remind you of an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. if you want to go further, go with others.